Some glories of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The first time that I actually saw Srila Prabhupada was in 1969 at the University of Buffalo in New York State. Prabhupada came to the university with Allen Ginsberg, the famous poet, and the lounge where they were having this program was called Haas Lounge, H-A-A-S, Haas Lounge. But as far as my consciousness was at that time, I call it Haze Lounge, because I was in a haze. At that time, at the universities, and the general mood was, just to take intoxicants, and so I didn't really register Srila Prabhupada's glories, but still it had an effect on my fallen self, because right after that I started seeing devotees everywhere. This University of Buffalo became a center or a vortex for spiritual seekers. I mean, who could imagine this very cold in the winter town, kind of industrial town, with a state university. Out of that university, I think at least 100 devotees came out of that university, and many of the leaders of our movement, sannyasis, gurus, for some reason the spiritual door opened on Buffalo, New York. And I also was a student there. So they had classes, and it was just a remarkable experience. And that was in 1969, when I was, I think, a freshman at the University of Buffalo. That summer, I took a bicycle after going back home near New York City. I took a bicycle from New York City to the Woodstock Festival in August 1969, the original Woodstock. And like I'm saying about devotees, I was there amongst a sea of everything crazy you could imagine at that Woodstock Festival. But there, right in the middle, were devotees dressed in their yellow dhotis, and they were chanting and selling peacock feathers for 50 cents each. And since I had started going to the temple before that summer, I said Hari Bo, and they all kind of descended on me they couldn't believe someone was saying a spiritual word in that craziness. So a little later, I really saw Srila Prabhupada. I actually clearly had a wonderful experience, and I hope you don't mind if I describe it as it happened. I had gone to New Vrindavan, which there was a little booklet, a magical little booklet that was printed called Handbook of Krishna Consciousness. And it had pictures of New Vrindavan, which seemed like just the purest place. And so again, I got on a bicycle and went all the way to West Virginia. That was a very special experience, but the most amazing experience was when we got in a van and went to the Detroit airport where Prabhupada was coming. By this time I had been going to the temple in Buffalo many times, but I actually had never really seen him, even though I did see him, but I didn't see him at the Haas Lounge because of my consciousness. But I would say a miracle happened for me. There were so many devotees from practically half of the United States who gathered at the Detroit airport to greet Srila Prabhupada. So there was a stairwell, actually an escalator, which went down to the place where they came up from leaving the airplane. And they said, Prabhupada's coming, Prabhupada's coming. And the way I knew Prabhupada was coming is that I saw a light coming out of the stairwell like I had not seen before. And I'm just sharing with you, my heart was racing, and then Prabhupada's head appeared above the wall, and it was literally like the sun. And it was so overwhelming that I kind of fell flat on the ground. And I myself, and I could see everyone around me, they were just weeping. And I felt I'm seeing the truth. I can't explain it. It was an overwhelmingly emotional experience. And if that wasn't enough, usually when you have an escalator, someone is standing and they are coming up, it goes kind of like this, and then the person walks off. This time, it came up, and it went like this, and Prabhupada continued to float. This is what I saw. Float over to the Vyasasana they had set up, and he rested into the Vyasasana. I thought for several decades that I had imagined this, but it sure looked real to me. And so again I fell down. But about 25 years later, I talked to our godbrother, Sureshwar Prabhu, who was also in the airport lounge, and he saw the same thing. So sometimes Prabhupada, not sometimes, all the time, Prabhupada was showing miracles, and that he was not from this plane. Even sometimes the way he would move his hand, it was almost like it was phasing in and out from the spiritual world. There were just so many amazing experiences happen, and I think that when someone really needed to be flattened, if they had any doubts, sometimes they were allowed to see something. It by no means means that I'm, or anyone that sees these miracles are like advanced somehow. It's because we're not advanced, because we needed to see that. Others may not need to see things like that, but it was just so overwhelming that this was the first experience I had seeing Srila Prabhupada. So I could, it was beyond intellectual understanding, or it was just overwhelming. And even when I think about it, it's overwhelming right now. In fact, Sureshwar, whenever I see him, we always greet each other that, oh hi, Floaters Club. We say that we're in the Floaters Club since we saw Prabhupada. But I was very glad that there was someone else who saw this. So I'm just sharing it with you. Sometimes people do not share these miracles, but once in a while, I think it's good to hear it. Just like when Prabhupada was in Atlanta once and he saw Gornitai, that his tears shot out like 2 feet or 3 feet, 1 meter. So Prabhupada tried to keep these things down, but he was completely free to show them whenever he wished to. After when I was at the University of Buffalo and I moved into the Buffalo Temple, there were 3 temples actually over the years. The temple I moved into, the president was Gunagrahi, who later became Maharaj. Soon after joining, I was asked to join a bus party, which was run by Rupanuga Swami, one of the first sannyasis. And after getting, we came to New York, and I got initiated from Srila Prabhupada in 1972. And when Prabhupada gave the beads, I put out my left hand because there was very little training at that time. So he just very nicely, like a father, just said, no, that hand. You know, it was just nicely, it was very sweet. And he said, your name is Satyanarayan. He said, this is another name of Krishna. So, after that, we drove to New Vrindavan, and Srila Prabhupada actually came on the bus. I have pictures of that on my Facebook page. That bus, I actually got second initiation with the installation of Gaur Nitai in the bus with a fire jugya with aluminum foil on the roof so that the bus would not catch fire. But Prabhupada came on the bus and I was a pujari. I gave him Charanamrita and he looked at everything very, just with a joyful mood. It was very sweet. He looked at everything. He gave respects and obeisances to Gaur Nitai. Then we had a door that opened up into the shower, and his eyes went a little wide. And then he came into the kitchen area. And we would cook when the bus was going like 100 kilometers an hour. We would actually be cooking with the ghee going like this in the wok. And, you know, we had so many spice jars, glass spice jars. So if we would put that on the shelves, they would just fall right off. So what we did is we took the top of the jar and we screwed it to the underside of the wood so that we could just put the glass up and take it off like that. And they would be solid on the shelves. And that's what Prabhupada noticed. He saw everything else, but when he saw that, he nodded, and then he started unscrewing it and screwing it back in, you know, so that he could see how it was very solid. And then he looked at us and he smiled and he said, "American ingenuity," which means American intelligence. So he was very kind like that, and I think any of his disciples could see Prabhupada's incredible attention to detail, things that we could never notice. Prabhupada noticed, saw everything. After this, jumping to India for a moment, a couple of years later, I could see, just like the bus, Prabhupada had a very special attachment or spiritual attachment to movement within the movement. He liked action. Talk is nice, but he really liked action. So he liked the buses because they were literally moving temples on wheels, and you could take it anywhere. And he felt extremely comfortable in that atmosphere. So I had, given Prabhupada the Charanamrita on the bus, and then again I had this experience to give Prabhupada Charanamrita, but this time on a boat, the Nitai Padakamalam boat in Mayapur. We had a very beautiful, it's called a jolly boat. It's like for carrying hay and things like that. But it had a sail on it, and we would take it down the Ganges, and we would, it's called tacking, if there's any sailors here. you tack back and forth from the coast to the coast, and you move forward like that. And again, I was the pujari for Gaur Nitai on that boat. So Prabhupada loved that we had that vessel, and we would take that up and down from Mayapur all the way to the Sundarbans, which is tiger country. There were a lot of tigers that would kind of eat people when they would climb the trees to get the honey. So when we were at the Sundarbans, everyone went off, but they were guided by police with machine guns so that they could take a tour of the Sundarbans. And I stayed on board as the pujari. But one time, and this involves Srila Prabhupada, as pujari, I'm always dressing Gaur Nitai in the morning. But when we would leave Mayapur around April, after the Gaur Purnima festival, this was in 1975, that is hurricane season. And it's, the hurricanes in Mayapur were very powerful. We would be kind of dancing on the roofs, kind of ecstatically and stupidly, because we could be hit by lightning. But we would always hear that so many villages were flattened by these storms. So we were out in the middle of the Ganges, and there are parts of the Ganges that are so wide that you cannot even see the shores, believe it or not, on the way to Calcutta. And one morning, when we're right in the middle of the very wide part of the Ganges, we saw a black strip on the horizon. Now that's a very dangerous sign because it means a very intense hurricane is coming. And we are in the middle of the Ganges. And it would take a long time to get to the shore. So I didn't see this because I was behind the curtain addressing the deities. And suddenly the temperature went down about 20 degrees, and the boat came to a complete stop. And then the storm hit. And it was so intense that the boat started to tip over because it had sails on it. And while that was happening, I had turned around to get some jewelry for Nityananda Prabhu. I turned around and Nityananda was gone. He disappeared. And I couldn't believe it, and then I opened the curtain and he had flown out off the altar and landed in a brahmachari's lap because of the way the boat was rocking. So that's like a really bad thing, especially if he hit the ground. Finally, one of the majis, which is Bengali for boatmen, broke the blade off of a sabji cutter. You know, the wood, he broke it off, climbed the mast, and hit the rope that was holding up the sail, because you had to take the sail down or we were going to tip over. So the sail finally got released and the boat came up straight. And I think Bhavananda was the captain of the ship at that time. He was a good captain. And he asked Srila Prabhupada when we got back to Mayapur, Srila Prabhupada, there was an incident with the deities, and we feel an offense would have been made. And he said, oh. And he said this, one of the deities flew off the altar and he might have hit the floor. And Prabhupada said, oh, which deity? And he said, Nityananda Prabhu. And Prabhupada said, oh, Nityananda, he is a very controversial character. In other words, he wanted to fly off. He wanted to fly off the altar. He said, and so that was. I mean, Prabhupada had a way to be express levity at the most devastating times, and so that was. It was a relief, but at the same time, we knew we had to fasten the deities better. So that was just an experience, this idea of movement within the movement. Prabhupada, I think he gave us a little slack, as they say. He gave us some dispensation because we were taking the boat. We would go up and down the coast, and the villagers would come on board and give mangoes and rice to the deities, and we would take the deities on palanquin, to the villages. So that was a very nice experience of Prabhupada's levity and lightness of being. Coming back to Braj, in 74, this temple wasn't here. In February 1974, when I first came, there was a big, huge crater where the temple was going to be. And there were some of the concrete with the rebar, the iron rods. But it was a very early stage. And the only finished place was partly finished was Srila Prabhupada's house. And there was otherwise, there were just construction tents around. So we would run from the Fogel ashram where we could stay every morning and run to hear Prabhupada's class. And one particular day, we came running, and Prabhupada started speaking a very beautiful lecture. And about 10 minutes into it, there's this big, huge smile across Prabhupada's face. And he's looking behind us. And we turned around, and it was George Harrison of the Beatles and Ravi Shankar, the very, very famous sitarist. And they just entered the room humbly. And George came up right in front of Prabhupada he had his beads out. He sat in kind of a lotus posture, and he was focused on Srila Prabhupada, and so much. And besides myself, Gunarnava was there, Guru Das, Yamuna, Lakshmi Moni, and just a few other devotees. And it was interesting to me that Ravi Shankar, unlike George, bless his heart, but he sat in the back with his shades on, his sunglasses, And so I just saw there was kind of a different mood in what they, how they approached the whole situation. So Prabhupada kind of changed the lecture a little bit to say that we should give everything to Krishna, which was made sense. But he was smiling so much at George, and when the lecture was finished, he asked Guru Das to bring prasadam. But at that moment, George saw Yamuna. And just a few years earlier, he had been with Yamuna doing the Radha Krishna album in London. And so he ran over to Yamuna right in front of Prabhupada and gave her a kiss on the cheek. And we're thinking, oh my God, he's doing that in front of Prabhupada. And Prabhupada just was beaming, you know, like a father of us all. And just feeling the love and the sweetness that was happening. And because it was all for Krishna, that album Prabhupada loved so much. And then George said, Prabhupada, we want to go to the Yamuna. She was like just with, you know, Yamuna Dasi, but then he talked about the river. And it was just a really sweet, I was just thinking that here we were in the most important place in the universe with the Shaktivesh avatar of Krishna and two of the most famous people on the planet. And we're just sitting there, you know, witnessing events that are so historical. So, you know, anything Srila Prabhupada did was a historical, he drew that to him. And so after this, actually in 1975, I went back to Calcutta. And at the University of Buffalo, I had gotten a degree in biology. I wanted to be a doctor. And can you still hear me? Yes. So I think I was like kind of bothering Srila Prabhupada by asking him if I could be a doctor for Krishna. And at Delhi, when I had just arrived, I went on the roof of the temple, the early Delhi temple, where Prabhupada was getting massaged by Shrutikirti. And I asked him if I could become study under his Kaviraj in Calcutta, because I was going to go to Calcutta. And I thought if I said Ayurveda, if I study Ayurveda, then Prabhupada might be interested in agreeing to my proposal. But Prabhupada just said, not now. You know, he was getting massaged, and I kind of felt like jumping off the roof at that point. But later, when I came to Calcutta, Sat Swarup Maharaj was the secretary, and I said, I really want to see Prabhupada. And these are things that were very hard to happen in America. You know, Prabhupada would be surrounded by like a forest of dandas, and it would be very hard to just, for any disciple to go in. But he said, yes, you can speak to him. And I told him why I wanted to speak to him. He said, kind of good luck. But when I came in, I gave obeisances to Prabhupada, and he was sitting, in that comfortable way he sits, and he was expressing himself and was having a conversation, clearly. And, but there was no one else in the room, but he was having a conversation. So I felt, again, I was disturbing Prabhupada. He was probably having a discussion with his spiritual master or with Narada Muni or someone, and so I kind of interrupted. But when I got up, I said, Srila Prabhupada, I had written to you about becoming an Ayurvedic doctor and studying under your Kaviraj, and he kind of moved back. And I could see he wasn't thrilled with that idea, but he could see at the same time that I was very attached to it. So, first of all, he said, Ayurveda, Western medicine is very advanced. Very advanced. So that kind of pulled the whole foundation out of my argument, just one sentence, because I really wanted to be a Western doctor, but maybe I was trying to say Ayurveda, because how could he say no? It's the Vedas. But Prabhupada was saying no. And then we talked a little more, and he said, whatever medicine that works, just use it. In other words, don't become a doctor, but whatever medicine that works, just use it. And then he lifted up one of his books and said the sentence that changed my life. He said, just work with my books and be a spiritual doctor. So, when Prabhupada would give direction like that to someone, it wasn't just the words that he gave the person. Actually, everything changed at that moment. Like I believe the same day, Guru Kripa and Yasodananda Swamis came from Japan. And without knowing what I had said to Prabhupada, they said, why don't you do something for your spiritual master? And I was a pujari there. I thought I was doing something, but Prabhupada wanted something more. And then I was invited on the BBT library party, which, was an incredible experience. And that went on, and then it went also outside of India, about 14 countries. But while in India, a year after Prabhupada said that to me, to be a spiritual doctor, I came, actually Vyasaki was traveling with me at that time before his music career for Krishna. So we had been going in one of the vans, one of Gargamuni's vans that he had brought from Germany overland through Turkey and into the United States, into India. And we had one of those vans, and we're going all over. And so we went up to Kashmir, and I was able to get a standing order of Prabhupada's books in a Muslim-oriented university. This was up in Kashmir, north of Himachal Pradesh. And so when we came back down to Vrindavan, Prabhupada was there, and Jagadish Prabhu was the secretary at that time, and we said, we're with the library party, we would like to give a report to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada immediately invited us in, and I was the first to speak, so I said, by your grace, Srila Prabhupada, I was able to get a standing order of your books in a Muslim university. And when I said the word Muslim, the Prabhupada's whole mood changed, and anyway, I'll say what he said in a minute. But we had a really wonderful discussion, and I said to get from Jammu to Srinagar in Kashmir, I said there's a tunnel, Srila Prabhupada, and it's 4,000 feet high. And he said, no it isn't, it's 14,000 feet high. And I said, I was shocked, how did Prabhupada know that? But I said, but Prabhupada, I think I saw the sign, and it said 4,000 feet high, and he said, no, 14,000 feet high. And it took me like 20 years to realize that it said 4,000 meters, not feet. So Prabhupada, he corrected me without calling me a fool for misreading it, but he just said, no, you're incorrect, it's 14,000 feet high. And then I said, well, how do you know that, Srila Prabhupada? And he said, I went through that tunnel and I delivered my first 3 Bhagavatams to a library in Srinagar, the capital of Kashmir. So it's amazingly enough, we all know Prabhupada started everything. He was the first library party man, and he himself took his first 3 books, and we actually saw those books in the library. And I had gone to the Muslim university, but Vyasaki went to that library, and we actually finished the set. We gave him, he actually ordered a standing order. But it's all to Prabhupada's glory that he started everything. He actually himself went to that university way up there. I mean, he did things that we don't even realize, that aren't even recorded. So we had that wonderful discussion, and then I told him about the Muslim university, and he made a statement now that's kind of famous in ISKCON, and a lot of the book distributors are tasting the nectar of this. He said that anyone who distributes books in the Muslim world, I take the dust from their feet and put it on my head. And wherever there is an Arab or a Muslim, that is the Muslim world. Wherever, if they're a tourist visiting Los Angeles, or if they're going to school in Paris or Germany, or Sydney, or anywhere in the world, that's actually the Muslim world. And this Arabic book distribution has a very special place in Prabhupada's heart. Prabhupada never made a statement like that for any other, not only any other language, not only for book distribution, but for any devotional service. He never said something like that. That if you're the best book distributor in the world, I'll take the dust from your feet and put it. He didn't say that. Or if you're the best anything. But it was kind of, there's a special mercy that's reserved to this work, and I can only thank the devotees all over the world now. It's become like an exciting adventure to distribute Arabic books. And the one thing that they all tell me is that they have a very special joy when they do it. I've gotten letters that their whole joy of Krishna consciousness has raised. And I am convinced that is due to the special blessing that Prabhupada gives for this. So I can only thank here locally Adaivi Shakti, Mataji and Saranga Thakurji of the BBT. They've ordered pallets of these books. And I just personally know, because I was sitting in front of Prabhupada when he made that statement, and something came over him which was so divine, it's hard to describe. But I could see that if we could do this, we would be pleasing his spiritual master so much. Because he was excited, so excited about it. And this time, instead of moving back like he did when I asked to be a doctor, he moved forward. Everything is significant regarding Srila Prabhupada. So I just, there's a famous saying, I'll end with this. There's a very famous saying by Goethe, who was a German philosopher. He said that boldness, to be bold, is genius, because the moment you take a bold action, immediately providence or God appears. And then doors open that would never have opened, bridges appear for you to walk over that would have never appeared. And therefore, whatever you can do, do it now. Because boldness is genius, and you must take action now. So, this was so evident with His divine grace that, in fact, to the chagrin or to the shock of some of His disciples, whenever they would say something very light-hearted, like Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, you might as well go to China. And Prabhupada says, very good, you go to China. And he didn't mean that. But Prabhupada, he saw he had a different transcendental vision where he knew that this was the right person at the right time. He spoke it, and he knew Krishna's blessings would be there. So Prabhupada was all about action, not just talk, but action. And, so I'm just suggesting that whatever you may feel in your heart that you want to do for Prabhupada or give to Srila Prabhupada, do it. Just do it. Don't worry that you may not be good enough. And that Prabhupada wasn't like that. It was all action. There was no time to think even. You had to, you thought in the service of the action. That's it. Not that I'm not qualified or not, no, it's just action. Don't waste 1 second. And that's how the mercy from Prabhupada just pours on all of us. So, thank you very much for your time, and all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Now we have His Grace. He's coming here. Please come. Pritu Prabhu has so many pastimes with Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Amagyantimirandasya vinanjana shakaya chakshur umnistam yena tasmai sri gurave namaha. Sri Chaitanya manubhishtam stapitmena bhutale swayam rupa garamayam dadati swaparantikam. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Sri Jiva Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Those days were very special days in that sense that if Srila Prabhupada would have come 10 years earlier to the West, it would have been very difficult because the West would not have been very responsive. But when Prabhupada came to the West at that time, thousands and thousands and thousands of young people were disenchanted by Western culture, and they were protesting against the Vietnam War, and from there a huge amount of people were looking for an alternative to materialistic views and lifestyles. And so Krishna made it like this. It was planned, basically speaking, right 5,000 years ago in Brahma-Bhavata Purana. Ganga is complaining to Krishna, what will happen to me once you leave for the spiritual world? All these sinful people will simply deposit their sins in me. And the Lord said, my dear Ganga, do not worry, there's a plan B. And this plan B has some parts, or some angas. The first is, he said, there will be chanting of Hare Krishna all over the world. That was the first thing. The next anga was, he predicted that Srimad Bhagavatam would go all over the world. And that also became true. So even stated in Srimad Bhagavatam that this Srimad Bhagavatam will ignite a revolution in the hearts of the people of the world. Then the Lord says there will be another anga, and that is that people will offer their food to me, which is, of course, we understand the importance. According to Bhagavad-Gita, the devotees of the Lord eat only foodstuffs that is offered to me in sacrifice. Others eat only sin. And then the last thing Krishna told Ganga, said, this chanting and hearing of Bhagavatam, chanting of the holy name will go on for 10,000 years. This is all predicted in Bhavishya Purana. No, sorry, Brahma-Bhavata Purana. And then 500 years ago, the same Krishna came as Lord Chaitanya, 500 years ago. And he enacted, or he started this movement. by chanting the holy name, dancing in kirtan, and from there the Goswamis would print their literature, write their literature. From there it went all over the world. Practically speaking, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, then Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and then Notchandas Thakur predicted that Maisena will come and he will go all over the world. That was Srila Prabhupada. He was a historical person, predicted 5,000 years ago, practically speaking. 500 years ago, excuse me. So when Prabhupada then came to Europe, he came to Amsterdam, I remember, and I came the day before in Amsterdam airport, so I knew where the immigration was. I ran upstairs, the kirtan was going on downstairs. We all took a one VW bus to the airport. There were 17 people in the back, piled into each other, practically speaking. And so I saw Prabhupada in the immigration. I lifted up my camera and I made a photo. And at that moment, Prabhupada turned around and we waved. I still have that photo. There was nobody behind me. It was just Prabhupada and myself making a photo. And it was very sweet. I cried immediately. I laughed. I had contradictory feelings going through my body, of laughing, crying, trembling, everything at the same time. And I fell on the ground and paid my obeisance. I saw Prabhupada's feet going by. He went downstairs. And then talking about miracles, before I could understand Srila Prabhupada's broad Bengali English only to a certain degree, because Prabhupada said questions, any questions, or he would say birds, and many birds, meaning birds. In the morning I listened to a tape. I could understand about 50%. In the airport, when he was speaking in the VIP lounge, I could understand every single word. And I went back to the same tape that I had listened in the morning to, and I could understand everything. So from that moment on, I could understand everything Prabhupada said. It was very miraculous. And then we had an initiation in the temple, sannyasa initiation of Akhundananda, Prabhu who came, Akhundananda Maharaj. And some initiations, Jagannath lilies were installed also. And Prabhupada came in and he saw that there were no flowers around the Havan, and he became very angry. He said, "Why are there no flowers? There should be flowers. Who's in charge for this?" He became very upset. Prabhupada could be very angry, not for himself, but then when he saw that Krishna was neglected. And so somebody said, "But Srila Prabhupada, the television is there, they're filming." And Prabhupada turned to the television, "And I don't care about the television. I care that Krishna is not being worshipped properly. That's what I'm caring for." And so that was Prabhupada's mood. He didn't care for Vox Populi. He was interested in the satisfaction of Krishna. He said that we want to have this certificate of Krishna. This man has done something for me, not popularity. He said this in Boston. It was amazing to see Prabhupada acting. There was one journalist at a kirtan in Fondle Park, and there was really maybe 2,000, 3,000 hippies, maybe 10,000 even, staying there overnight in this gigantic park, and there was a stage. And one journalist came closer and closer with his lens, ultimately put his lens on Prabhupada's eye. And Prabhupada kept lecturing. We didn't know what to do. We were confused. And all of a sudden Prabhupada said, "Drown!" And the guy was in a shock. He fell back almost by Prabhupada's strong uttering. So there are so many things I do want to talk about. I want to go to some main things that I saw. He came to Germany, and in Germany, I happened to be in charge for this festival. And I had a magnetic board with all the names on it, so I could move devotees from here to there, from there to there. In this way I saw the whole temple, all the people that came to this festival, everybody had a name tag, and I was moving people around. And Prabhupada, all of a sudden I felt somebody stood behind me. It was Prabhupada. I said, "Oh, Srila Prabhupada." I paint more basins. And he said, and what is that? And I said, Srila Prabhupada, these are all the devotees here. And he said, and then, he said, I can take a devotee from here to there, from the kitchen into the daily department, from the daily department into Harinam. He said, how does it work? I said, it's magnetic. He said, oh, magnetic, can I try that? So then he was moving people around. He said, okay, let's take this person from here to there, this brahmachari from here to there, this brahmachari from here to there. And he enjoyed himself for a moment doing this, how this clicked, how they all sat together. And then he turned to me and said, and all this will fail unless there is love and trust between the devotees. And that was so significant that all this is just a material arrangement. The grease of this movement, the oil that makes a machine go, is love and trust. It was very strong point Srila Prabhupada made. Right then, in some little thing, Prabhupada made a huge point so that we can understand nothing is more important than love and trust in the dealings of the devotees. Then I remember he went to Sweden. And in Germany he spoke to some very, very big professors, and it was kind of, I started to talk about it in the morning. It was kind of amazing how he dealt with these different people. One person he was lauding, the other one was chastising. Christian professor, he chastised him a lot. And again, I don't want to go into the details because I have only 20 minutes time left. And so I remember we went together to Stockholm University, and this university was very left-oriented, anarchist and socialist, communist, Maoist, everybody was there. And Prabhupada could feel this. He immediately could feel the mood of the audience. And so he sat down and he started to speak after the prayers. He said, so there are 4 classes of men. And this was just really the opposite of what people like to hear, because they talk about a classless society. Communism means classless society. He said, so there are 4 classes of men. And Prabhupada spoke, there are first class men, second class men, third class men, fourth class men, and third class Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya. And he explains the whole societal structure of Vedic culture. And people were in a shock. They couldn't believe that somebody would do that here in this university, to talk about something so counter-revolutionary than the 4 classes of men. So finally somebody couldn't control himself anymore, stood up and said, of course, Swami, you think you are a first-class man. Sitting at the feet of you, many people are going down before you, you're decorated with flowers. And Prabhupada was in a shock when he heard that. He was shocked. He said, no, like this. He said, no, you misunderstand. And then he said, I'm not first class. He said, I'm actually 5th class. And there was dead silence in the room when he said that, I'm actually 5th class. And then he has his spectacles on his nose, and I happened to sit there, right there where the camera is. And 2 big tears came down his cheeks. And he said, because I'm the servant of everyone. And that became so strong. It was this impression I had that Prabhupada, he was really the servant of everybody. He was a servant of the whole human society, practically speaking. And it was very beautiful to see how he was crying. Tears came down his cheeks when he said that. And so that's something I will never forget, how Prabhupada was actually really the servant of everyone. And he spoke to so many people. I remember there was an Indian ambassador came to Sweden, and Prabhupada explained to him that if he wanted to be a Brahmin, he had to give up these principles. He had to give up these sinful activities. And the professors or the ambassadors said, well, I could do all this, but one thing I cannot do, I cannot give up drinking wine. And Prabhupada said, that's easy enough. Just give it up. He said, I can't. I'm drinking wine from childhood on, practically speaking. And Prabhupada looked at him and said, well, that being the case, should think that Krishna is a taste in wine. At least you remember Krishna when you drink wine. And Prabhupada would extend himself to such a degree to make this man, gives this man accessibility to the Hare Krishna movement. Now, there were different situations. Prabhupada came to France, and I remember he was very tired. He came from New York in the morning, 5 o'clock or something. He was taking a bath immediately and was ready for lecture. He came for the greeting and the lecture. Vyasa-san was quite big, this big. And Prabhupada sat in one side, like this. And he leaned on the pillow, and gradually, he went more, he fell more over. Then he took actually the legs on the Vyasa-san and stretched out. He was lecturing while his head was here. And then after some time he fell asleep because he was so tired, and everyone, Prabhupada is sleeping. So he slept for 2 seconds or 2 minutes, I forgot, and then all of a sudden he said, and therefore Krishna says in Bhagavad-Gita. And he continued the lecture. It was very sweet. Then somebody asked, are there any questions? Somebody said, yes, Srila Prabhupada, you said sometimes this and that in New York. Prabhupada said, who said that? He said, I don't know, Srila Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada looked very wryly and he said, there are many. Prabhupada said this and Prabhupada said that, but Prabhupada never said that. It was very funny to hear him saying the word Prabhupada himself. I remember that. So we carried him down to the Yaga. 200 people came initiated on that day. It was very wonderful. We were all doing book distribution at that time, hardcore. Actually, Germany was at that time leading in book distribution for a good while. Myself also was a book distributor at that time. Every day from 9 o'clock to 6, and 6 days a week, and then one day rest and again out. Week after week, week after week, week after week. And so, since we're doing good in book distribution, Prabhupada wrote us a letter and he said, I still have the letter on my computer, there is no better way to please me than to distribute my books. I wrote this, my dear devotees. That letter I have on my computer, a copy of it, Xerox copy of it. There's no better way to please me than to distribute his books. And so he invited us to come to London, all the German book distributors. So we all got into our trucks and drove overnight, reached there in the morning. As soon as we came, Shama Sundar said, Prabhupada wants to see you immediately, even before any greeting or whatever. If we have not even taken shower, it doesn't matter. Prabhupada wants to see you. And so we went in his room, and he was very happy to see us. We were all beaming and strong fellows at that time. I was 25 or something. He had some energy. And he got all this young energy in his room. And he said, so what is the most important verse of all? And one of us lifted his finger and he said, Yaradekataka Krishna Upadesh, wherever you go, you preach. And Prabhupada said, that is a fact, that is the most important verse. And then he looked at us and said, what does that mean? Upadesh. And we didn't know. What is that Upadesh? And maybe Pele's, Srila Prabhupada said, no, Upadesh is the supreme instruction of Krishna. Like Upadeshamrita, the nectar of the Supreme. And then he said, what is that supreme instruction? He looked at us and we were dumbfolded. We were taken by surprise. And then he said, Sarva Dhamman Prijaja, Mamikam Saranam Raja, Amtvam Savapapilyo. He said, that is the most instruction in Bhagavad-Gita. And then he looked at us and said, not only that you distribute my books, you also have to read my books. I remember that. It's very strong. He said, you have to read my books. And so that was that. I remember on the morning walk, there was a sign. And Prabhupada said, what does it mean? And one of our devotees, young devotee, I know his name, but I won't say. So he said, I think, Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, don't tell me what you think. Tell me what you know. He said, I don't want to hear what you think. That's not important. Like one time, a devotee was telling Srila Prabhupada, it was all mental speculation. One time a devotee asked Srila Prabhupada, sometimes I'm thinking. And Prabhupada said, don't do that. Because he knew. he was speculating. So he came to the Bhaktivedanta seminar twice. The second time, when I was there, he came a lot of times, but I saw him 2 times. And the last time was when he came to London in his last days. And I was shocked, and we always shocked when we saw how Prabhupada was so skinny that he couldn't walk, he had to be carried upstairs, downstairs. And in the middle of it, he had to be rushed to the hospital. There was some problem. And the doctor told him, Swamiji, your kidney is, practically speaking, ruined. You have to go 2 times a week on a machine, on a kidney machine. And Prabhupada said, I'm not going to have that. Doctor said, well, then you will live not longer than this year. You won't get over the winter. And so that's actually happened, that Prabhupada left the body in November. And so then, at one stage, Prabhupada asked that from every yatra some devotee should come. And so I happened to be the person to go there, my good luck, because nobody believes that Prabhupada would leave so early. And so in these next 3 weeks, I had a lot of opportunity to be there in his room. And I remember when I came, Prabhupada asked Krishna Goswami, somebody should sing. And so Tamal said, anybody can? I said, yes, I can sing. Can you play harmonium? Yes, I can. So I sang for Prabhupada. And then he wanted me to come back. And so I sang actually every day from 2 o'clock in the morning for Prabhupada. Hours and hours. And most of the time Prabhupada was alone. It was just Prabhupada and myself. And it was very sweet. It was a very sweet situation that here you can sing for your spiritual master in the early morning hours. And then there were so many things that happened during that time. I was actually there, and I would like to tell you this story because this is a story that is completely misunderstood. It's a very simple story, actually. But because people don't have the information, over the years they have made so many rumors in this regard. So one day Prabhupada took medicine. He had a dream that there was a doctor from Calcutta. He was a Ramanuja doctor. And he gave Prabhupada some medicine that was ease his condition. And so we called Adidana, I think Abhiram called Adidana, the temple president from Calcutta. And he came the next day with his doctor. They came and took a room in the guest house. And so the doctor examined Prabhupada and said he has to take some medicine. It is called Makradvaj. And this medicine has a homeopathic amount of arsenic acid in it, very small, like many Ayurvedic medicines. So he administered it. Somebody had to go to Delhi. I don't know, either Lokanath Swami or Abhiram went to Mathura or to Delhi, that I don't know, to get that medicine. So Prabhupada took some medicine. So the next morning, I happened to be by his bed when he said that I think I've been poisoned. And I was in a shock. So I went immediately to Adida and said, Prabhupada said he has been poisoned. Adida told the doctor. The doctor came and said, impossible. Let me examine Prabhupada. He examined, he said, yes, the Makradvaj. He said, this medicine is not properly mixed. There's a problem with it. Let's stop it. And so the next days, 4 or 5 days when Prabhupada lived, there was never a complaint. That's all there is to this story. If you know all the facts. And even Adridana, who's now not anymore so involved, he never took back his opinion. That you can also see then described accurately in the book of Satsvarupma, by Bhakti Swami. The same story, a very simple story that has been vastly blown out of proportion and turn into some conspiracy theory. But it's important for devotees to understand this, that there was something very simple happening which has been misconstrued. So then Prabhupada, in his last days, I remember that he wanted some medicine, and he asked his servant, in this case Bhakti-yoga Swami, he said, "Did you close the bottle?" Because devotees sometimes they forget to close the bottle. He said, "No, Srila Prabhupada, I forgot." And Prabhupada said, "That is your disease, all of you." He said, "You know how to open bottles, but you don't know how to close them. You start so many new things, but you don't see the consequences," which is the situation of mankind in general. I mean, what is it? Our rivers are polluted, our oceans are polluted, the food is polluted, the earth is polluted, the bodies are polluted. I mean, everything is polluted due to scientists' glorious inventions. Opening bottles, nobody knows how to close this environmental pollution that is threatening life survival on this planet. It's opening bottles, opening bottles. We said, you know how to open bottles, you start so many new things, but you do not see the consequences. And then he says, you know how to live, but you don't know how to die. And so therefore I have to show you. And so out of this conversation, then the idea came that Yaduba was called to make this film, the final lesson. It is part of the sequence of happenings on in Prabhupada's last days and hours. This is 2 days before, maybe 3. And then in his last day, he all of a sudden lifted his hand and said, took him some time to get the hand up. The body was already struggling for air. This noise that you hear when somebody leaves the body, it's having difficulty breathing. He said very peacefully that everything moving and non-moving, there's nothing but Krishna. This consciousness is called Krishna consciousness, and I touched on this in the morning class, that everything moving and non-moving, there's only Krishna. He's the only living being, and we are all just expansion of that living being. There's only one living being in the whole creation, material and spiritual. Krishna and his expansions. And so that was the last thing he ever said. And then at one stage he went, Hare Krishna. And the na didn't happen because he was already with Krishna. And there was an enormous kirtan at that time. And everybody was crying. I remember Jayadvaita was there. I don't know, maybe Dina Bandhu, we were there. And a lot of people, about 50 people in the room. The kirtan was tremendous. Prabhupada was lying there. And everybody knew he was gone. And for us, it was just unbearable. He was our father for so long, for in my case, from 72 all the way to 77, for 5 years. And he left from one moment to another. And we were alone. We were like orphans, crying like orphans who lost their parents, our father and our mother, so to say. And it was devastating. It was a devastating situation. And so what follows in the evening, there were people talking about Prabhupada. I actually had to help to put Prabhupada's body up. We washed the body. He had no rigor mortis. His limbs were like this, you know. So we had to close his mouth because the mouth was open. I remember TKG asked me, how do we keep it closed? I said, let's take a gamsha. And so he was holding in the mouth, and I wrapped the gamsha around his head. You can see that on the pictures. That Prabhupada was wearing a gamsha on his head, around his head. And so even when he was lowered into the pit, his legs fell down because he was sitting, was empty, lowered down in a cross-legged position. His legs fell down. And then he was put into this, onto this marble plate, and then salt was all the way over the head. And then a stick was put on his head, a bamboo rod. I was wondering what that was about, but then more sand till it reached the same level as the rest, and people were pushing like crazy, and I pushed people back. That was my service. And then the stick sticked out this much, and a little mound was formed around the stick, and then the stick was pulled out, and to locate the exact point where Prabhupada is lying in Samadhi. And then there is some story from that situation that I personally experienced with Srila Prabhupada that I do not want to, how do you say, talk of. Sometimes maybe in private. It was very, very amazing actually. So that was it. Srila Prabhupada was gone and we kept going, doing our preaching, our book distribution. And I remember when Professor Durkheim, this famous Zen Buddhist, he spoke to Prabhupada, and he was so amazed and overwhelmed by Prabhupada's personality that he ultimately paid a dandavat to Prabhupada. When I brought him to the railway station, Durkheim said, Peter, I have met many swamis, many gurus, many mahants, many babas, many exalted people in India, even in Western countries, Pope and so many people I met. I never met a person like your spiritual master. He said, this is a very great day for me. The greatest day of my life, actually, he said. He said he was on the other side. He was durch. In Deutsch has durch. That means he was on the other side. We are still on this side. And that was the highest praise you could possibly get from a man like that. It's also another little story. It was this Professor Heidegger. Prabhupada wanted to see him because Shamasunda presented Professor Heidegger to Prabhupada as a philosopher. He was probably the most important philosopher of the last century, Professor Heidegger, Martin Heidegger. And so I got this phone call to see him. So I went down there, and it was remarkable. I knocked at the door, and this woman opened, and she was shocked. I was an Indoti, Tilak. She said, who are you? I said, I'm a monk from an Eastern tradition, and my guru, my spiritual master, would like to see your husband. And she said, well, it is too late. I said, why? Is he gone? No, he's upstairs. He said, then, he said, he cannot hear anything, he cannot understand anything. So he was lying there. I said, then he cannot complain. She said, that's true, you can see him. So I went and here he was lying, his head was here, his legs were there, his wife was there, and then something very remarkable happened. That I said to him, Professor Heidegger, no reaction. Here he was lying, this most iconic person in philosophy of a century, and he didn't react. I said, Professor Heidegger, and he didn't react. So I took the Gita, I brought the Bhagavad-Gita, and I touched his hand. I said, Professor Heidegger. Immediately the hands came and grabbed the book like this. He woke up, and he took the book and lifted the Bhagavad-Gita, and he opened his eyes, and he said, Bhagavad-Gita, Bhagavad-Gita, I know this book, Bhagavad-Gita. And then he pressed it to his heart, and a tear fell down his eyes, and he fell back into unconscious, which is amazing. And the wife said, how did you do that? I've not seen him since 3 years like that. So you see, a little miracle was happening. But he had some pious, you can see this in his books, not exactly a theist, but he's certainly not an atheist. There was some piety that he could get the Bhagavad-Gita in his last days. He died very little after that, by the mercy of Prabhupada, holding it to his head and had a moment of clarity. The last moment of clarity in his life was when he saw Prabhupada's Bhagavad-Gita as it is. So I see my time is over. Let's leave it with that, I guess. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.